let's divide this up into relatively short-term and then longer-term stuff as well. And Dr. Wittig, first of all, what do you believe the best outcome could be, assuming Britain does leave the European Union, and as we were hearing earlier, even that isn't certain. Assuming it does, what is the best outcome that there could be for trade, for EU-UK trade?
Well, let me first of all say that I'm delighted to be invited to this panel, also because Germany has a stake in the British automotive industry. We have a heavy footprint here with BMW-owned Mini, with BMW-owned Rolls-Royce, Volkswagen, Bentley, and all the German brands, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, all together, contribute in a way to this legendary automotive industry of Great Britain. I think one of 3 new cars in the UK is German-made. So this is a pretty heavy footprint we have here, and that's why I'm delighted to be here. Now, your question, what the best outcome is, it depends really on the UK, I would say. If it has to be a Brexit, we want a negotiated Brexit. My head of government, Chancellor Merkel, has been, I would claim, the voice of pragmatism within the 27 and vis-a-vis the UK. We'll continue to be that. We will look at any new idea that emerges from the UK side once a new Prime Minister is in place. I think we should not lose a lot of time once a new Prime Minister is in place. And we want a negotiated, orderly Brexit that also basically keeps us as closely together as we possibly can manage. And I say this also from a strategic perspective. We should think long-term. In a world that is very likely be dominated by China and the US, we have to ask ourselves as Europeans, where will we be in 10, 15, 20 years? Will we still be on the global map, politically, economically, militarily, technologically? If we want that, we can't afford a hard Brexit.
Mm. Peter Chase, what's your best scenario, do you think, that comes to pass in the next, I suppose, 6 months to a year?
Well, thank you very much. Look, I'm American. I was an American diplomat. I have been a third country outside the EU and negotiating with the EU. And we used to talk about ourselves when we were talking to other countries like China and Brazil. We called ourselves the coalition of the excluded. And I have a hard time understanding why Her Majesty's government is voluntarily choosing to join that coalition. But since they are, or if they do, there are ways to do a trade deal with the European Union. I served here in our embassy in London many years ago. I know how qualified the civil service here is. A deal could have been negotiated and could have been presented, a deal as a future trade deal in 2017. But it means accepting that not all regulations, that you don't have veto over regulations, which people have had a difficult time accepting. But this is just the regulation that governs the trade in goods and services. I was very much involved in the negotiations of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and many of the structures of that, with mutual recognition in many different regulatory areas, could have been easily achieved by the United Kingdom. Then, things have gone beyond. It may be a little bit more difficult, but I would try to recreate that.
Do you think it's realistic, as Boris Johnson seems to be suggesting, that you put to one side the EU structures and processes and go now to the WTO and to GATT 24, which has been so much discussed and was by us earlier on, and look to a deal that is outside the auspices of the European Union and do it that way?
How do you do a deal with a country without it being involved? No, the United Kingdom can be outside the EU. If the United Kingdom is outside the EU, it has voluntarily said that all the legal structures that it has been engaged in for 45 years, it has abrogated them. And I think it's really important to understand that the United Kingdom has said, we are cutting off those legal structures. Once you do that, you have to do a withdrawal agreement because, not surprisingly, the people you're saying no to are not going to be very happy with you. So you have to clear up the past. But when you've cleared up the past, you can build the future. All this discussion about the withdrawal agreement is misdirected. It's because if you don't clear up the past, then why would they want to trade with you? It's 27 countries you've broken your treaty relationship with, so you have to have them on your side, right? And that I think stands to reason. If you don't have them on your side, if they don't trust you because you've broken up and ripped up the agreement, then you've got a situation where you will fall back on the WTO rules, and that won't be pretty.
Yeah. Minister Chen, what's China's view of Britain's immediate future as a trading nation?
Well, before I answer the question, I just like to say it's really my pleasure and honor to be here to join the panel discussion. And actually, outside the main hall, when we had coffee, Ambassador Wittig and I agreed that both of us are drivers, but both of us are not experts on auto industry. So it's certainly a daunting task for me to speak in front of so many experts. But it's a great comfort to know that all the morning discussions are focused on Brexit. So I thought it may be we could have a change topic and change of perspective. But now I found out it's an unescapable topic. We certainly respect the choice of the British people. And of course, from China's perspective, we would like to maintain good partnership with both UK and EU. And we believe that EU and UK have enough wisdom and diplomatic techniques to deal with it. And of course, we would like to see a smooth handling of the situation, and it will have a smooth Brexit. I think it will work out a solution that will conform to the interests of all sides.
And what about the bilateral relationship post-Brexit between China and the United Kingdom? What is a realistic vision of that relationship, both for this industry but more widely?
Well, I think if I can use one word to describe the current status of a bilateral relationship, is good. And actually last week, our Vice Premier, Hu Chunhua, paid a very successful visit to UK, and we had the 10th round of economic and financial dialogue, and we reached 69 outcomes, and we initiated the Shanghai London Stock Connect. It's a big event in our financial sector, and both sides have agreed, also signed agreements, for example, to promote cooperation in third market. So we certainly view UK as a partner, as an opportunity. And then this is first the point. And secondly, I think in world stage, we have witnessed rising tide of protectionism and unilateralism. I think both China and the UK, we share many converging points on fighting against protectionism, on promoting multilateralism, and also to promote free trade in the world. So there are many things that we can cooperate together.
And on that, the minister was interesting. He said, I wrote it down, he said, we want to be a global leader in free trade. Does that, to you, have meaning and substance when you hear a British minister say that?
Sure, of course. Of course.
What does it actually practically mean?
And the United Kingdom has been a global leader of free trade as a member of the European Union as well. But the United Kingdom has always been a country that has been a very strong advocate for trade that's liberalized of course, is underneath the rules. And again, the importance of that, the rule-making body, the United Kingdom has been a major contributor.
But I'm struggling to think what the difference is. If we are now announcing ourselves as global leaders in free trade, you say we've always been in the vanguard of that movement. What possibly could we do differently?
You mean, what could you do differently?
It's just not obvious to me how we lead in global free trade in a way that we don't already, unless it means really bring. Well, it goes to this, and I suppose, and I put this to you, Ambassador. Do you have a sense of what Britain wants to be post-Brexit? Because we hear from some ministers there's a kind of Singapore sense of us, buccaneering, very low tax, low corporate tax. And yet actually you hear from others almost the complete opposite. We're sort of oddly and ironically going towards a more European model, more kind of Southern European model. Do you have a sense of what Britain wants to
Well,
do?
my personal opinion is that Britain will have a hard time to be global Britain, having to trade according to WTO rules with a hard Brexit. That means for the auto industry on both sides 10% tariffs, for spare parts 4.5% tariffs. If you are dealing according to WTO rules, you have to factor in the fact that the WTO is under tremendous stress, has been weakened. It is I would say, not very generously treated by the US and by China. To be honest, the WTA was in crisis before Trump, but the Americans are blocking the appellate bodies, so we have no really enforcement mechanism, arbitration mechanism in place. So the UK is in a position to deal according to WTO rules with a WTO extremely weak. Now the way out of that is to agree free trade agreements. For the auto industry, that will mean new free trade agreements outside the EU means local content. And rules of origin, so that that doesn't really play very advantageously in favor of the UK wanting to engage in new free trade agreements. So I think there is a pathway here, dealing according to WTO rules and then engaging in as many free trade agreements as possible. Now, has the UK the clout to conclude, as Trump would say, beautiful trade agreements with the US, with China, with India, as a country of 65 million, as opposed to 510 million citizens of the EU? I don't know. That remains.
Well, let's put that question to Minister, first of all. Minister Chen, if we were to do our own unilateral free trade deal with China, what sort of areas would China be looking for progress in order to oil the wheels of the deal going through?
Well, I think we're very open to the idea of reaching a free trade deal with UK. And I think the two sides at the working level have maintained discussions. But I think you have to finish Brexit first.
Yeah, yeah, okay. We hear very clearly what you're saying, Peter.
I wanted to, just very quickly in terms of the United States, negotiating a trade agreement with the United States would not be a walk in the park. That close special relationship is very important, including to Mr. Trump, but Mr. Trump considers himself the world's best negotiator, and he will do that. I think it's interesting to note that in this industry, the renegotiation of NAFTA into what we now have, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, was about auto rules of origin. That was the issue. And the auto rules of origin went that way to the benefit of the United States. So in your industry, and I remembered it was mentioned in the first discussion, the rules of origin bit will be really important, and don't expect it to be easy for UK and cumulated UK-EU content to benefit from it. It will not be easy.
And again, what can Britain do to oil the wheels? I mean, does it have to be around chlorinated chicken and higher prices for pharmaceutical products, which is, of course, a very big deal for a lot of ordinary Americans, actually, who see themselves overpaying for stuff that is dirt cheap, frankly, in the NHS. Has all of that got to be in the mix, or can it be a lighter touch deal?
It will be in the mix. I'm less concerned about things like chlorinated chicken or even biotech foods, because I don't think Her Majesty's government can enter into an agreement that effectively makes it so that the food processing industry here can't be exporting to its largest market there. I think that these are technical issues, and people will have to spend a lot of time actually understanding the supply chain and just what those rules of origin mean. What you should be having is you should be having an agreement between the United States, or I'd even say the NAFTA, and Europe, the EEA. That's what you should be doing. And if that would be one thing that the United Kingdom could argue. It would be a lot easier if the United Kingdom were simply part of the EU, but that's besides the point. You're just adding another partner. But that rules of origin thing for an investment-based relationship where there is a lot of global content will not be easy with an administration who believes very strongly that there should be, that previous administrations offshored our manufacturing strength.
So, Ambassador, if we decide, and we were discussing this, the politics of this, which I won't ask you all directly to comment on, but say we were to decide under a Jeremy Hunt prime ministership, which is entirely possible that we get, that actually we delay and think again about these things and ask for a renegotiation of various aspects of the deal that we had done. Where does Europe stand now? We were having a guess at it earlier on, but tell us from your government's perspective, where does Europe stand vis-à-vis Britain's kind of endless not leaving of the European Union?
Well, I hope you don't want to entice me to step on that thin ice of domestic politics. I will refrain from that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can say this, and I repeat myself. Germany has been a very pragmatic voice in this whole torturous Brexit process, and we will continue to be that. And even if we have a short window of opportunity after a new prime minister is in place, we will welcome any new idea how to solve that famous backstop issue, and we will be ready to talk about it, and we will be willing to work towards a negotiated deal, which we think is long-term the only viable and sensible option for the whole of Europe.
And if it means altering the process and bringing the talk about that deal closer and putting some other things on the back burner, I mean, is that the kind of area where the German government would be willing to at least consider British proposals?
Well, I mean, I can't reveal sort of the various, let's say, points where we could work on to come to in the end, to a negotiated deal. This is probably the most complex domestic political environment you could imagine here. I have no magic wand here. I can just reiterate that my country is ready to talk, and the Chancellor once said she would be willing to talk to the last hour in order not to have a no-deal scenario. I mean, that doesn't mean we are ready to fulfill all the demands and requests of the British side, but I mean, it's a mindset that we are not giving up in achieving a negotiated, orderly Brexit.
Yeah. Okay, I want to turn this in a second to sort of wider thoughts about world trade, but let me throw it open at this stage in case there's anyone who's got any questions. Yeah, right here down at the front. Hold on 1 second, we'll bring our microphones in. Right here at the front. Thanks.
Thank you. Kostas Pittas from Reuters. I wanted to ask Peter Chase in particular, what do you think a US-UK trade deal could look like? Because already as a panel, and particularly between you and Justin, you essentially agreed that, for example, on agriculture, Theresa May's deal, if it goes through, keeps the UK pretty much exactly aligned with the EU. If the British food industry tried to detract from that even just a bit to open up possibilities, famously chlorinated chickens, that would stop the British food industry essentially from having the access that it needs to the EU. So it doesn't seem like there's much scope there either. Again, on automotive, if the UK detracted even slightly from the common EU rules, that could lead exactly to sort of friction at borders that wouldn't be possible. So where is the scope for doing something with the US that the UK doesn't already do via its relationship with the EU? Or are we just looking to replicate exactly what we've got already?
Well, there's no special trade deal between the United States and the European Union today. So we play by WTO rules, and I think that one of the things that underscores is that not being a member of the EU doesn't mean you don't trade with the EU, right? If the UK is another country and we approach it to do an FTA, the FTAs will look pretty much like the FTAs the United States currently has, including the ones that we've just renegotiated with Mexico and Canada. I don't think that there's any magic to that. None of those FTAs mandate that the other party accept all of the agricultural practices that we have in the United States. But they nudge people in that direction, and in some places, actually, they do agree to make some changes to those in those rules. And I think it's worth stressing that the United States and Europe, including the United Kingdom, have a fabulous economic relationship right now. So you'll be building on that, but the one place where there really is difficulty is in agriculture, is in foods. And that's one place you'd need to think about it. The issue of autos and auto trades in the US administration discussion about national security and autos probably has more to do with agriculture than people think.
Meaning?
I don't want to disagree completely with Chris when he made his opening remarks and he said the president means it, but I think you need to say that the steel and aluminum tariffs that the administration put on for national security reasons were easy to predict and were meant because the president's trade policy team is largely people who come from the steel industry. And they've been fighting for protection for this domestic steel industry for a long time. The steel industry supported it. The same argument, national security, in the case of autos, is not supported by the industry. It's much more difficult to make in any circumstance. It's interesting that the report has never been published. And to me, that's much more of a negotiating tactic.
Yeah.
And part of that leverage certainly is directed towards the EU. And when you talk about US-EU relations and difficulties, the vast majority of it is in agriculture.
Yeah. And looking at China's relationship with the United States, but also with the global economy, it was interesting that the drop-off in exports from the United States to China really did with that graph that we saw earlier on. And I mean, the thing that occurred to me is, well, what has that slack been taken up elsewhere, including from Europe? In other words, although I'm not suggesting for a minute that global free trade can sort of be abandoned and everyone be fine anyway because other people will gain from it, but how does China see? Does China see a kind of shift, a gradual shift away from the United States and a focus on trade with the United States? irrespective of what comes of the negotiations between Trump and...
Right. I think in the end, it comes to the question how you view the world. We view the world today as a global village. It is a world where countries are mutually dependent on each other, where countries' interests are closely intertwined with each other. I think it's impossible to decouple, delink any two major economies. I mean, for China and US, for example, our bilateral trade increased this year marks the 40th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the US. In the last 40 years, our bilateral trade increased by 250 times. There are many people working in the US and many Americans are working in China. So the interests are closely intertwined. I think it's impossible, and I think it's not a good idea to delink the two. And secondly, I think in the world, globalized world, we have to work for common interests and the win-win results. It's not one country first. It's not I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. You have to find a way to compromise. I know people are very, how do you say, following the development of China-US trade negotiations at the moment. Eyes are now in Japan about the meetings of the two presidents. Of course, we are following the situation very closely as well. We certainly hope that the positive outcomes could be produced out of the meeting. But I think it's really important for China and the US to have a good relationship, not only for the benefits of world trade, for the benefits of people all around the world.
And that's the other point that was being made by the minister. There are real challenges to global trade. Never mind Brexit, never mind actually even those talks between China and the US. The whole system is being challenged in a way that it hasn't been for some time. What's your sort of view of the entire system into which everything, including these people's industries?
Well, my country has been a proponent of a free and fair, rules-based international trade order. It guaranteed our prosperity. It guaranteed also the prosperity not only of the West, but also of China. So it's under attack. And we are against this protectionist wave that is sort of has hit many parts of the world. I think the countries that are believing that free trade is good for our economies and that I think it's a win-win game and not a zero-sum game, we should team up. And this has already happened in various fora. For instance, EU, Japan, and also China is working on WTO reform. But what we as Europeans do, and you know that trade is the exclusive competence of the European Union, we pooled our sovereignty into the European Union. That makes us strong. And the EU has been concluding or negotiating a lot of free trade agreements around the world. And that is our way forward. And we see that the EU is sort of coveted as a partner of free trade agreements by countries in Asia. We have one with Japan. We have negotiations with Vietnam. We have one with Singapore. We have one with Mexico. We have one. We are approaching one with Mercosur. So countries come and want to conclude free trade agreements with Europe as a shield against that protectionist wave. And we are advocates, as are, is the United Kingdom. That's why we cherish this partnership with the UK so much, because it has always been a beacon of free trade. Yeah. And I think we should stand up united against this protectionist tendencies that has increased over time.
Before I put that to Peter, let's have a question here, and then I think will almost be time for lunch. If we could just pass the microphone along, please, right to the middle. Thank you. Here we go.
Thank you, Justin. As Ambassador Wittig has pointed out, the EU have negotiated deals with a number of countries and are negotiating free trade deals with a number of countries. So can somebody explain to me why it's in the UK's interests to leave the world's biggest, richest, closest free trade market, where we've spent hundreds of millions to make our distribution channels work, our brands work, where we have a seat at the table to make the laws, adjudicate the laws, and enforce the laws, all for half of 1% of GDP, in order to chase the 16% of world trade that's left, that's small and far away?
I doubt that any of them are going to bite on that, but let me put it to them anyway. I mean, to what extent, I suppose the question is, assuming we do leave the European Union, to what extent we can replicate those advantages from outside, and with the right kind of a deal, Ambassador, presumably, to an extent we could.
Well, I think this question is addressed to a Brit, and you are the only Brit here.
Yeah, yeah. Great.
So just,
I also I'm a few years off retirement, only a few, but a few, so I'm going to not answer it and keep my job. Peter.
I was just going to say, so how would you respond to that?
Yeah, okay. Right, more questions? Anyone else to bring us up to lunch? Otherwise, I will ask my one last question that I was going to, and then we'll... Yes. Oh, sorry, yes, yeah. So we've got very bright lights today, which are nice, but... Yeah.
Alessandro Maronjo, SMMT. One question about future standards. Now, we are witnessing a revolution in this industry. We are expecting the development and deployment of new generation vehicles, and regulatory barriers can come up if we develop standards related to these new generation vehicles in different nations on different regional blocks. How we can avoid that, how we can ensure that regulations across the world do not represent an additional trade barrier.
Minister?
Well, I don't know whether I understand your question properly. You're asking about the new generation of vehicles and what kind of regulations they're going to have, and then what's the impact will have on the auto industry. Well, I think for China's auto industry, it is a big industry in China. I think for the last 20 years, China's auto industry has experienced a boom. And we are the biggest, for 10 consecutive years, we're the biggest automobile market in the whole world. But starting from 2018, we have witnessed some new trends. Namely the sales and then also the production of cars both dropped. But then still, we're still the biggest. But on the other hand, we have also witnessed some new developments. And one of the developments is the integration of high tech with the automobile industry. For example, the high tech giants like Baidu, Alibaba, they have done a lot to integrate the traditional auto industry with the application of new technologies, and has increased really, really fast. And this is one point. And secondly, another trend is that the new energy cars have registered a growth rate of 60.1% in China last year. So I think we sell about 1.27 million cars, new energy cars in China. So it's booming. These are the growth points. And of course, it's difficult to regulate it because standardization is also another issue. But we would like to promote cooperation with other partners in Europe, with US, and how to deal with this new trend to promote the development of new energy cars. And I would say China's auto industry is undergoing a period of adjustment, and it's going to last, I think, at least 3 years.
On that positive note, we must leave it because it's time for lunch. A round of applause, please, for our panel.